Alright, picking up right where we left off in part 1 of setting up Unity with a Firebase database. I am Dr. Dan, and we are going to go through the simplification of the startup code and the combination of authentication. So we authenticate a user to letting that user modify our database and read from our database. Which is the default and recommended settings for a Unity Firebase app. I have right now the, let's see, this is the database test app open. I'm going to go ahead and close Unity. So let's do some file renamings real quick. So let me pull up my Explorer, make a new Explorer here. Alright, so what we had last time was from, let's see, from my user profile right here. We have a quickstart Unity Git repo we pulled, and there was a sample app, an authentication, and database. So I'm going to start creating a more simplified project. First of all, by just going to my Unity folder for all my Unity applications. And let's just grab this test app Unity and let's copy it and paste it over here. Whoops, didn't mean to put it in Bobblehead Wars. I was afraid that would happen. Alright, so now we have test app there. Let's rename it Firebase. Alright, so now in Firebase, we have some other things named Firebase. Let's say database, auth database. So we know that it's the right one. Alright, so we have the same files in there. Now back in Quickstart Unity in database, in test app, let's see, there's a few things we want. Actually, all we really want is this script in assets that and assets test app, that is the UI handler. That's all we really care about. Let's go ahead and rename that script though. Let's call it database handler. .cs. Okay. So now over here, let's open up that Unity project again that has authentication working. And that is going to now be in Documents, Unity, and Firebase Auth Database. Alright. So let's fire that up. Okay, here we have it, our authentication. Let's make sure everything's still working. Looks good. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is let's make a scenes folder. Okay, and in scenes, let's create a scene. And let's call this scene 0. And let's create a second scene, and let's call that one scene 01. Whoops. Scene 01. There we go. Alright, so we have scene 0, scene 1. Cool. Alright, and scene 0, let's fire that up. Let's go ahead and handle our UI elements for a simplified authentication. So in UI, first thing I want to add is a text field, an input field, I mean. There it is. And let's go ahead and duplicate that. So we need a email and password for authentication. Then let's add a button for login and a button for create user. So let's name these. Let's call this email, input, pass, input, create, user button, and login button. Okay. Let's focus on that. Let's see. So, it doesn't look very good so far. Let's see, the game is just a bunch of stacked stuff. Let me zoom in on my scene so I can see things. There we go. Okay. Let's add to our canvas a component that is a vertical layout group so we can see these things more clearly. And let's align that to middle center. Alright, in our email input, placeholder text, let's say email. And for password, let's say password. For create user for the text, let's write create user, and for login button for the text, let's go ahead and write login. Alright, so we have our elements all there. Now, collapse that for a second. Let's create an empty game object and reset its transform just to be consistent, and let's call this a login handler. And let's see, so in test app we have something called a UI handler. Let's rename this to be more consistent, since the database also has a UI handler. Let's call it login handler. And we better open that up and rename it in Visual Studio as well for the class name, or Unity won't know what it is. Alright, so here we need to call it a login handler. Let's save it. Alright, now let's start stripping this down a bit and simplifying the code. We don't need another authentication method here, so I'm going to delete that. And we don't need a skin for the GUI, because we're not going to have a GUI. Let's get rid of that. We need log text is okay, we can keep that in. Password's okay, we can leave the rest of those. Use password input, okay, that's fine. We don't need these vectors for scrolling. We can leave the UI enabled. Field there, let's see, password input, we're always going to require a password, so we can get rid of that as well. Let's leave phone verification stuff in. Well, we don't really need that either. Let's get rid of that. Let's see, we don't need a secondary authentication option anymore, or a max log size. Well, since we're still logging, we might as well keep that. Dependency status is fine. Alright. Let's leave that in. Check and fix dependencies. Okay. Now, here we're setting up our primary authentication. We can get rid of secondary authentication completely. Let's get rid of that. Alright. On destroy, we can get rid of other auth there. We're going to leave these disable enable UI elements on because they might be useful later on when we want to shut down our UI while our database is spinning, is updating. We don't have a scroll vector anymore, so we can get rid of that in debug log. Display user info we're probably not going to use, but let's leave it in case we want it at some point. That's okay. We may want to track whether our authentication state changes if we want to add a log out button. For now, we'll leave that in as well. Same with token change. Log task completed is fine. That's just for logging. All right, create user async. So we're going to have a void return method for that because Unity is not going to be link buttons up that have a task return because it doesn't know what to do with that. So instead of a return, we'll just call this method, and we can still continue with a task and handle it over to our handle create user async. That's all fine. Update user profile async. We don't care about that for now. Sign in. Again, we want a void return method, and we want to just call our auth method, and then we can handle that off to our handle sign in result. Sign in anonymously, we're going to get rid of that, and that's fine. Link with credentials, we don't need either. We can get rid of that. Reload user we can leave in, we may want that at some point. And okay, get user info is fine, sign out. We may want a sign out button at some point. Delete user, let's not have that in here. Let's only delete users from our database itself. And display providers for email, no, well, let's see. That's fine. We may want to have functionality where we have give them the ability to reset their email. Verify phone code, let's get rid of all that. We don't care about other auth or swap auth focus or do anything that has to do with our GUI. So we get rid of all of that stuff. Alright, so we have a much smaller file now, much simpler functionality. And still some of this stuff we don't need, but this is fine for now. So I want to add a few things now. Let's go ahead and add some public variables. Public text box, email text, and public text password text, and then let's see, when we push a button, we want to grab whatever text is linked in those text boxes. So down here where we have create user async, let's go ahead and grab these methods and pull them up. So down to sign in with credentials. Let me cut those, just bring them up in the file so we can deal with them. So let's have those after our update method. Okay. So we want a button that's going to be tied to our create user, and when that button gets pressed, the first thing we want to do is set our email variable to our email text dot text, so whatever they put in there, and our password to, you guessed it, password text dot text. Once we have those, we can debug log it, and we can go ahead and create our user there. I'm going to grab these, and when we sign in, we'll do the same thing. All right. So now that's all we want to do over here. Okay, so let's save that, and in this scene we can save our scene. Now our login handler, I'm going to go ahead and add the login handler script to it, and then I'm going to link my email text to email text and my password text to password text. Okay, and that is it. Now we can save, and we can play the scene and test it out. So for email, let's do a@a.com. And for password, we'll just do pass 1 2 3 4 5. All right, let's create a user and see what happened over in our database. So authentication. Let's reload this, see what's going on. All right, so that didn't work. So let's go back to Unity, and okay. Oh, we may need to build and run this. Let me think here. Oh, I know what's going on. We didn't hook the buttons up. All right, so create user button. We need to add a onClick method, and for that onClick method, we are going to pull over our login handler there. And then once we have that, we can click on our login handler, and we want sign or create user async as the method that we're calling when we click that button. And for login button, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add an onClick method. We're going to drag over our login handler to here, and the function we're going to pick is going to be sign in async. Okay. All right. Let's save it, run it, and now let's do a@a.com, and we can put in a test 1 2 3 4 5, and let's create a user. All right. So attempting to create a user. Cool. Looks like it worked. Let's refresh our project. There it is. All right. One last thing. Let's test the login with that user and make sure we can log in as well. Sign in completed. Awesome. Okay. So that is login handled. When we log in at this point, we're going to load. So let's add that scene to our build. Build settings, add open scene. So scenes 00 is added. Now over in my scenes, let's open up scene 01, and let's add that as well. All right. So this scene is going to be our database scene. So I'm going to pull up my database handler, and let's set up a folder here called scripts. And in test app, let's pull our login script into script. And at this point, we can actually just delete the test app scene. So we have that login script there. Let's switch back to scene 1 to make sure nothing went wrong with that deletion. Cool. All right. Now scene So there's our script. Let's pull in the database handler script and put that in our scripts folder. So now we have a database handler. So first thing we need to do is import our custom package, our Unity SDK, Firebase SDK database package into this. Because remember, this was began as that's not good. All right, interesting. So I had some interesting things on that import. Seemed to deny access for a second. I think we had a thread spinning somewhere that it didn't like. Let's give it a moment here, and it's going to detect that we're on .NET subset, .NET 2.0 subset, and we want to switch to .NET 2.0. We are now switched to it. All right. So we have our database script. Let's open it up and strip this one down as well. We don't want our database firing up this GUI skin. We don't need a vector scroll position. And we need to make sure this is called database handler. Let's save that. So now database handler has the same name. All right, database handler, cool. All right, let's go ahead and set the max scores to something more reasonable, like 10. And once again, we have an email, a log text and an email text. We don't need a scroll vector there. We'll leave the buoy enabled there. That's fine. So we check and fix dependencies, and we initialize. Our editor has the right URL, so we should be able to have that work in the editor. We start our listener here. We can leave the debug log there. We don't want a scroll vector though. All right. So add score transaction is fine, and add score is a void method, so we don't really need to mess with that. All right, so let's just get rid of the render GUI stuff. And we have, again, a much smaller, cleaner file. So let's save that. And switch back to Unity, see what's going on. All right, cool, no errors. So now in our scenes in scene 2, let's make a simplified database handler scene. So let's go ahead and add a UI text field. And let's see, let's bring that up to like here. And for the name of it, let's call it leaderboard. And just so we can see it, we'll say leaders there. Let's make it white so it shows up. And we want overflow so that when we get more leaders we can see it. Maybe like right there. Focus on it for a second. Let's pull that down to there. Looks good. Okay. So I'm going to save that. What I just did there was switch my these up here using the QWERT tools. So anyway, that's all good. Now we need another UI element. We need a text field, which is going to be oh, not a text field, just kidding. We need a button and an input field. Let's have an input field. Let's duplicate that. So one is going to be name input. The other is going to be our score input. And then let's add two buttons. So UI button. Well, actually, we only need one. It's going to be our add score button. All right. And name input for the placeholder. Oh, let's go ahead and just for a second, I'm going to add a vertical layout group to these. I'm going to get rid of it. So I just want it to be middle center for a second, and then let's save it. Let's remove it. Okay, and that was just to center my my buttons. So now I'm going to move this here and then up. Let's see what this looks like. All right, let's move leaders back over here. Okay, this can actually be a little higher for this one. Let's move it there and then over, and our button can be here. All right, so let's check out the X position is 94 on that. Let's just set that to 94 on everything so it's a little more neat. Oops. 94. Okay. I can drop that down a bit. And for leaders, we actually can make this a little bigger. We have 10 now. All right. Let's pull it over a bit too. Cool. All right, and then our game view looks like that. Awesome. All right, so for our add score button, let's change the text to add score. And for placeholder text here, we can do name. And score. Cool. All right. Now we need to add. Let's close that down. Save the scene. Let's add a empty game object. This transforms fine. Oops. Let's pull it out of event system. Transform still fine. And let's call this database handler. And let's add a script, which is database handler to that. All right, so that script needs to know about the name as the input coming in, the score as the input coming in, and the add score, and the leader's text board needs to be updated anytime there's an update to the database in order for this to be a real-time database. So let's do that real quick. So back here in our database script, we need to add a, these are public variables, so let's have them at the top. We need a public text box, which is score text, public text box, which is name text, and then we need a let's see, we need a reference to our text field, which is leaderboard text. All right, so we have all those public references, and in start, we can, at the end of our dependency, check. Before we get out of the method, we can actually actually, we don't even need to do that. So when we initialize Firebase, we go down here, we are setting the app editor and starting the listener, and the listener is what pulls all our leaders by our JSON objects that we call leaders, and ordering them by child. Now it is also listening for any value changed and updating. After all that's done, it is updating our leaderboard array with titles and adding our snapshots of our database, the state of our children in our database that are at leader scores. It's adding that to our leaderboard. So when all that is done, else leaders right down here, we can go ahead and update our leaderboard text. And we can first set that to nothing, and then we can say for let's see here, what do we want to do? We could do a for each, I guess. For each, let's see. So let's do a for each. So for each, and we can just do and leaderboard, which is our array. What do we want to do? We want to set the display text, set the leaderboard text dot text. Let's set it plus equals. Let's have a line between each entry. That escaped n gives us a line between each one, and then let's add item. So that'll give us a nice line by line breakdown in our leaderboard text box of each updated child. Okay, so that's all we want to do there. We could make that its own method. I don't think we need to right now. And then what else should we do? Okay, so we already have the add score button, and all that's doing is when we call this add score method, it gets a reference to our leaders objects, and then it has a add score transaction, and the add score transaction up here is going to use a mutable data object to sort through our leaderboard array, check the minimum scores, and if it's greater than any of the minimum scores, it will add it to our database and remove the minimum. And if it's lower, it won't do anything. So that's what we're going to do. And we have all the things we need to link up here. So let's save that. Let's return to Unity and link some stuff up. So here in our name input, let's, sorry, in our database handler now for score text, let's drag over the score text. For the name text, let's drag over the name text, and our leaderboard can be right there. All right. Now we need to link the add button. So let's add to the onClick method there and add score button. Let's drag over our database handler and add the method add score there. That's it. So we can test this out real quick. Okay, that's fine. So let's do A, score 1, add score. It's active. Invalid score or email. Interesting. What if we give it something in that format? Still not liking it. Okay, so let's see what's going on. First of all, we can check our rules. So there's our database. So we have public rules, and we have some scores that we should be pulling. All right. So authentication. All right. Invalid score or email. So we're getting to here. Add score. Aha. So what are we adding when we add a score? We need to be adding the email and the score. So how does it know about that? It doesn't yet. So when we add score, we need to set score equal to score text.text. Aha. However, score is expecting a 0. Expecting an integer. So what we want to do is let's do a C# trick. We'll do an int32 parse of score.text, and that way score will be parsed into a number when we put a what's interpreted from Unity as a string into the score text box. And then for email, since that's already a text, we are just doing our name text.text. All right, now we should be good. So let's fire this up again. All right, cool. It's pulling in the scores. That's great. Let's give a high score to A and add it, and we see we get an immediate live update from our database. And in our database, if we refresh, we can see that A is now going to be the 6th member down here because we've set the database maximum above 5 up to 10. Okay, so we'll get 10 values and then it'll start sorting. So we've got that working. So the very last thing we're going to do, let's save this scene, switch back to scene 1, and open up our login handler. And we're going, when we create a user, when we log in, so let's make sure they're actually a user because we might want to do our create user differently. When we sign in, we continue on from the sign in with this task, and we finally continue with sign in result. And when we handle sign in result, right after we log the task complete, let's do, let's load scene 01 our database. Okay, so we do that by importing, by using Unity Engine scene management, and then as we sign in, we want to load scene manager dot load scene async, and the scene we're going to load is called scene 01. That's where our database, that's what our database scene is called. Okay, so we'll force them to create a user name, and we could have some toasts or something that tell them how to do that. And then once they have a user created, they log in as that user. That's the current functionality. We could also load a scene on create if we wanted, by just having that here. Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, in our scene 1 database handler, this get is active is enabled, can only be called for the main thread. When we get to our build, when we actually build the game, our script for database handler that is going to our to this URL where we have the app set editor, that is what's causing the problem here. So our UI is not going to update because we're transferring from a different scene. But in our build, we won't see that, so everything should work fine. For now, let's set the max scores back to 5, and it doesn't matter what this value is. We're going to override it when we add scores anyway. So over here in our login handler, when we create a user, you'll notice that they have a disable UI. So right here, we need to do something to prevent login while database is updating. So they were disabling their GUI. We can disable our buttons, but let's not worry about that right now. And so now we'll go to File, Build and Run. Let's make it a little bigger than that. All right, here we go. So we have a user called Dr. Dan in our database, I believe. Let's check. There we go, drdan.com. At drdan.com. And the password I made for this was drdan12345, and we can just log in here, and we see our top 5 scores right there. Let's look at our actual database here. There they are. And then if we add a score, finishing tutorial, 1,000 points. We'll bump that lowest score off, and we'll see an immediate update there. Okay, so that's it. Couple of things to note real quick. Again, when we see these disable enable UIs, we do want to make sure that we don't fall out of sync with the database. Our UI doesn't fall out of sync with the database, or we'll get crashes. So we do need to do something to either have like a toast or something that lets the user know we are loading things, and we need to disable any buttons that they can press that will change the state of our database there. We know where to do that because we have these throughout the code, right? That we got. But that's all I wanted to show you. So that's just a simplified database, authentication to database, and our database rules are now such that only authenticated users can modify the database itself. That is all I wanted to show you. Thank you for listening.